badasses.
Ecto Radio.
Nothing in his path was safe. Not the planes in the sky. Not the ships at sea. Not the men. Nor the vehicles on the ground.
Ecto Radio. The ghost hunting badasses.
It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum. And I'm all out of gum.
Only on the Supernatural Radio Network. Beer-fueled, whiskey-filtered paranormal radio.
All right, welcome to Ecto Radio. I am the Hitman.
I am Wild Wendy.
I am the dead bastard.
What did you do to that mic, dude?
I didn't do anything. Why does it sound weird?
It sounds weird.
It always sounds weird, that mic.
I'll move.
Okay.
I'm gonna finish up with the dead ones over here in my little mini fan club, and I'll move.
Okay, there you go. And on the phone tonight, we have Loyd Auerbach, one of the, how would we describe you? You're one of the more academics that we actually have.
I'm a parapsychologist. I'm not as academic as some of my colleagues. I'm more academic than many others.
Okay. And we got a lot to talk about. And thanks for doing the interview with us. I know it was kind of short notice, but
Sure.
That was very, very cool. I got to get something uncomfortable out of the way first because I actually brought up last week. There's two things. One, I wrote a book called Hunting the Ghost Hunters, and I was not kind to parapsychology, and I was explaining to my co-host, I'm talking about, back in, 70s and 80s, there was a lot of different associations. There was a little bit of backstabbing, kind of like the drama we see today. Some of them not reporting negative results and whatnot. But I am an open-minded fellow. So I was wanting to talk a little bit more about what's the tangible stuff coming out now. And also, I made the statement that there is not any current accredited college that gives a parapsychology degree, and apparently I was wrong on that. And I found out right after I said that.
Well, I'm actually curious as to what you were referring to in terms of the 70s and 80s, because there were plenty of them. The journals themselves were reporting chance results, which people would consider negative. As a journal of parapsychology especially would report a lot of things. I mean, when you only have 2 or 3 journals and you can't get papers published in non-parapsychology journals, it becomes very difficult to consider how many non-negative or positive results there are out there. However, a lot were reported at the Parapsychological Association conventions. I mean, the abstracts of those are certainly available. But there were a lot of, you're right, there were a lot of associations that were not parapsychology. They were not in the mainstream of our field, that were a little bit on the fringes, kind of like the ghost hunting groups are on the fringes at this point.
Right. That's what I'm referring to.
Maybe that's what you were referring to.
Yeah. And, and there's a lot we got. One of the things that that I'm very fascinated with, you put an article out not too long ago about low-frequency magnetic fields and how they can affect human consciousness. And I believe you were in a castle somewhere overseas. When
that wasn't me.
That wasn't you. Who was that?
No. That probably was Richard Wiseman.
Yeah, that's probably what it was.
The study, because he did a very large study with a lot of folks using low frequency, using magnetic field and low frequency sound, and a number of other things. Studying, he comes at it from a very skeptical perspective. I'd like to say it was me going overseas, but nobody's offered that to me since I did Japanese TV in the early '90s. So.
Well, you've done a lot of television and stuff, and that's one of the questions I did have. What do you think about a lot of these producers that, the shows? I mean, I've heard, stuff back and forth that, we'll shoot, 30 hours and it's all what they put out now. And,
right.
I know you've worked with a lot of them. What's your opinion on it?
Well, first of all, I mean, my father was a TV producer, although he was in sports, but he was in news before that. My uncle was a director. Television director. One of my brothers works for NBC right now, and I've been around television since apparently since before I was born. So I know the inside of the industry. I've dealt with producers over the years. Many producers over the years have consulted with some shows that were not that many that never ended up on the air. The reality is that when you bring in novices like Jason Grant or the guys from Paranormal State. Producers can, I won't say they take advantage of the novices, but they're signed to often contracts that don't let them talk about what actually goes on, that restricts them from talking about shows. I'm not saying that they're not doing their best to screw things up too, but production folks are out to make entertainment shows. I mean, Sci-Fi used to be, instead of being SYFY, it was a science fiction channel, and we have to remember that these are entertainment shows. Whatever you call reality shows are not true reality. That's been shown in so many ways.
All right.
You know, when they shoot Survivor, there's a camera crew in every single one of the folks on in that location. And I know, having talked to Mark Burnett, that they'll show a cut of the episode to the network execs or whoever has to approve it. And that one of the execs could say, I want more of this guy over here and less of this person you put in the thing. But they've shot so much footage that they can go right back and cut it immediately.
Right.
So when you're talking about any show, you shoot for, especially when you're trying to cover something that may or may not be happening, you may shoot for hours and hours on end, and you edit it down to 22 minutes. And unless the individuals doing the investigation are in the edit room and are capable of, given permission to actually say, don't do that, or do this instead, it's all up to the editor, the director, and the producer. So a lot of people blame, I can't say that they're without blame. Anybody who has their own show, it has some share of the blame. But the reality is that it's the production people themselves who have the blame for most of what goes on TV. Anything we see that gets screwed up.
One of the things I heard about, I heard that you were one of the people that kind of got the whole thermal imaging thing going.
Yeah, Andrew Nichols, who's a parapsychologist in Florida, and I had been talking. We had coincidentally been the first people who had picked up at the same time the tri-field meters, and actually I'm the first person apparently, when I'm told, to use one on TV, which I'm kind of sorry about.
Yeah.
In some respects. But we were having a discussion about a pilot we were shooting. We were actually shooting a TV pilot which has never aired, which one of these days the producers and I will probably release it to the web, but some people have actually seen it. And we were doing a couple cases in Florida, and the pilot was in conjunction with Japanese television, and they were basically funding whatever equipment we needed for the situation. And Andy and I had this idea, having seen the Predator movies, that since people often report cold spots, even though they're not physically cold, as we know, it might be interesting to see, because TV is a visual medium, whether or not a thermal vision camera could pick up a cold spot. We expected, when we gone on these cases that we had the thermal imaging with in Florida, that we'd see a differential in temperature if people were experiencing something, if they were experiencing cold or whatever.
Right.
And lo and behold, what we found was some unusual effects on the thermal vision that the company couldn't really explain, which we don't think were ghosts, but we do think were an effect of a ghost or something in the environment on that thermal vision camera. We also were lucky enough to have a room physically drop in temperature 22 degrees over a 20-minute period, and you didn't see any phenomena, but what you did see is the walls darkening as that actually happened. So the thermal vision was really to check for environmental changes, but it did apparently pick up some weird stuff that we couldn't explain too.
Right. Okay.
I will mention that. I just want to mention that the weird stuff, whenever you get anything weird on any device, you have to compare it against the human experience. And we were fortunate that when the weird things were happening with the thermal vision, we were actually getting unusual readings on every piece of equipment we actually had. And it was all starting at the moment this Japanese medium we were working with was supposedly talking to a little girl's ghost. And it lasted as long as she talked to the ghost.
You always got to keep the human experience in there. I mean, because I think that's one of the things that the hardcore skeptics discredit. Like, oh, they're just crazy. But there's just too much of it. But that's what we're studying.
I mean, we're studying the human experience. We're not studying something in the environment. I mean, even if there really are ghosts, we're dealing with a human who is dead. That means they're having a human experience also.
Right.
So when it boils right down to is we may be dealing with experiences that have a physical cause, or they may have a non-physical cause, one we can't pin down given our current science. But the issue is that if you leave out the human experience and you're using equipment that's not designed to detect something which we can't figure out, then what are you actually detecting?
Mm-hmm. You
have no context. You have an unusual magnetic field reading. I mean, when Andy and I did this case for our pilot, we had several different types of EMF meters going off. We had a Geiger counter going off. We had a geomagnetic sensing station went offline. It spiked so hard. We had the thermal vision picking things up. So everything was going off at the time that Mrs. Gibo, the psychic, was talking to this little girl's ghost. Now, remove her from the equation. You have an environmental anomaly which sets everything off. And I actually talked to a friend of a friend at the EPA, an environmental scientist, and he kiddingly said to me, I know what could cause all those things to go off at the same time. And I said, what? He said, a nuclear explosion. But since you're sitting here, I'm guessing that's not what happened.
Right.
So there's no context. We had nothing. I mean, if you don't have a human experience, you got nothing. You just got a bunch of really weird things that need to be explained with no way to even start explaining it.
So when I put up that we had you as a guest on our Facebook, I got a message, and there's a lot of people that want an answer to a simple question, and that is, what can these ghost hunting groups that want to actually contribute, what can they do within their capabilities?
Well, we're working on, actually, Andrew Nichols is involved, Barry Taft, myself, and a few other folks. We're trying to work on, I guess, a structure, an organizational structure that allows people to actually contribute some things. But what they're going to also need to do is learn to be good investigators from a scientific perspective, because most people are not. There's this idea, and this is partly, I think, this is certainly not from the paranormal. Stephen Chu, our Director of Energy, Secretary of Energy, had pointed this out a couple of years ago, that our educational system is really bad on science. Mm-hmm. And people seem to think that using technology is equivalent to doing science or being scientific, and it's not. Otherwise, if you want to say that, then if you use your microwave oven, you're being scientific.
Yeah. It's
and
more to the
that's
method.
Not the way science actually works.
Yeah, it's more to the method and technique. I mean, you can be just as scientific with a notebook and a pen as you can with all this fancy instrumentation.
Exactly. It's about observation. It's about trying to gather the data, trying to make sense of the data, trying to correlate or connect the data to whatever it is you're trying to study. And again, you can't leave out the human experience, because, when all these ghost hunter groups that are ignoring human experiences, what are they actually acting on? I mean, are they acting on a rumor that a place is haunted, but that came from a human? Are they acting on somebody's experience? A sighting of a ghost, that came from a human.
Right.
So you can't leave out the experience. Otherwise, you'd be a CSI unit just running around trying to see where the fingerprints are. And they could be everywhere. Okay. And then you get fingerprints, you have no idea what they're connected to.
So is there anywhere, obviously this is you're still working on it with Barry Taft and other people. I mean, is there going to be like a presence on the web or something that people can go to when it's ready?
There will be very, very, very soon. There's a couple things we're working on. One is a parapsychology portal, a psi portal. It'll be kind of like a front end. This is the place to go for, to lead you to the major organizations on parapsychology. And right now you can get to them through each other, but it'll also take you to some educational opportunities and some good basic information. We're trying to gear some of it towards the ghost hunting community as much, the field investigation community as much as we can. And then this consortium, this organization we're working on, we're hoping to launch. We've actually been in the process for the last year, so we're hoping to launch that very, very soon also. But there are other opportunities, there are other ways. One of the things people can do, and they can do it with very low cost, is to start reading books on field investigation, or start reading some of the books within the field of parapsychology, and not so much the celebrity ghost hunters who keep popping up at the conferences.
Right. And a lot of those books are actually kind of old, if I remember correctly.
Well, that's it. I mean, publishers are more excited by ghost stories, which is fine. I mean, there are some good ghost story books out there, but there are a lot of really good used books out there by, really easy to find, in fact, by D. Scott Rogo. He's one of the key people, I think, who's written in the field, especially about field investigation, ROGO. And another author is William G. Roll, who wrote kind of the classic book on the poltergeist, which has been out there. My first book, ESP Hauntings and Poltergeist, people keep telling me they can't find it, and yet I can go onto any used book site and find it for $3.
Yeah.
So, and that'll lead you to a lot of other materials. The other side of it is that you need to know the history. I think that a lot of the ghost hunters seem to think, and I've been at conferences where people have said this, that there was nothing really before the 1990s, and I look at them like, they're kind of, that's kind of a silly thing to say.
Raspberry flavored crack.
Yeah.
Well, I think
there's free books tons of free stuff through Google Books from the early days of psychical research, all about investigation technique.
Well, I think it's just become a hobby. I mean, TV shows came along, and then we just had this huge influx of people, for one reason or another, whether they want their own TV show or thought that was cool, and they got into it, and it's just become a hobby.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that if people were honest about this being a hobby or being something interesting to them, rather than so many groups, as you know, Cody, who are saying we're professionals and we're being scientific, and they're full of it.
Yeah. Unfortunately,
so if people call themselves explorers or hobbyists or whatever else they wanted to, that'd be great. There's been also this really bizarre reaction to the word amateur. And I'd have to say that most of the people out there are not even of amateur status, if we want to use the word amateur the way we do in the way one does in astronomy, or geology for that matter, because amateurs actually know something about the field.
Right. And that's at absolute best, It's kind of like we were talking, I've said it before on this show. There's not a ghost hunting group out there that is going to prove any of this. And I think that's kind of a reality that needs to be, emphasized.
But if they know what they're doing, they can contribute or at least come up with some more. And yes, it is anecdotal evidence, but you find patterns for the anecdotal evidence that you can bring into the laboratory. A lot of the mediumship research is based on the anecdotal evidence and the way that things occur in real life, and so is a lot of ESP experience and experiments. You take the life experience and you bring it into the lab to try to figure out what's going on. The ultimate question of proving the existence of ghosts really boils down to another question, a bigger question, and that is, what is consciousness? And this is a question that is subsuming a lot of scientists on the materialistic side and the dualistic side, who basically are not in agreement about what consciousness is. Quantum physicists think that consciousness is everywhere, many of them, that it affects our material world, and then there are the true materialists who think that consciousness is a trick of the brain. It's just a lie.
Oh, yeah, and then there's that whole semi-field theory that John Joe McFadden started, and then that's branched off and made many more theories,
Yeah.
It gets confusing.
So until science actually is at a point where they can say this is what consciousness is, we can't say that consciousness necessarily, we can't prove that it survives death. Although one physicist actually kiddingly said to me, if you can get a bunch of ghosts to come into our laboratory, we'd have a better shot of figuring out what it is.
Now, have you ever worked with Chris Fleming before?
I worked with Chris in a couple of different instances. I actually did a couple episodes of Ghost of the show, Dead Famous. Did the Houdini episode, and there was a Joan Crawford episode, too. Then I also, on the Houdini episode, we were in Pennsylvania. We had gone to the Houdini Museum there, and I took Chris out on a case. I happened to have a call out there, and Chris on TV is one thing. I think he's really personable, really great on TV. I had recommended him for a TV pod that I worked on, in fact, and he was not working as a psychic, but he was great on that. He was absolutely phenomenal on that. I got to say that when he is directed, this is a problem with people who have psychic ability. Some people need direction. They need almost a handler.
Right.
This is actually something that you would do in remote viewing experiments. You'd have somebody working with the viewer to point them in different directions. And Chris seemed to do really well in that circumstance.
Yeah, we were on Dead Famous with him on the Billy the Kid episode. Mm-hmm. And, I have a tendency just to naturally be skeptical about psychics just because I've ran into so many frauds over the years. But Chris is one of the ones I think that guy has something. Yeah, he does. I think that Chris, and he certainly has learned a lot over the last several years, but a lot of psychics, unless they have the right role models, they don't always know they can't even analyze their own abilities. I've met a lot of psychics who are very good over the years who didn't know the difference. For example, they go into a case and assume that every image that they're seeing is a dead guy, as opposed to picking up potentially on past information, what we call residual information or residual hauntings. And that can be a real difficult situation. And in fact, I was on one case a few years ago with a couple psychics, one whom I really trusted, the other was brought on by the TV show. And the other one seemed to be pretty good, and she could pick up information, but she was so wrong in her interpretation because the people she was actually viewing, she was seeing, the figures she was viewing, those were people that were still alive and had left their impression behind more than anything else. Right.
She said they were all dead, and they weren't.
Okay. Yeah, that would be...
It's the living, it's the living who leave the recordings behind, not the dead.
Okay, so now we, Dead Bastard and myself, we have our little radio names, okay? We ran into you at the St. James. I was just curious if you had an opinion, what you thought of the St. James, because we didn't get time to talk about that, and you just arrived and all that.
Yeah, and, honestly, I was there to participate in the shooting for the pilot for Ghost Prophecies, which I got cut out of because A&E ordered the pilot cut from an hour down to a half an hour, although Chad Kalick did put some of my deleted scenes up on Facebook and on YouTube. And I actually knew a bit about the St. James from a friend of mine, a parapsychologist I know, who also had a bit of psychic ability, which is a kind of rare thing in my field. But Keith had told me all about the St. James. He'd been there back in the 80s and was convinced that the place was truly, had something there. Mm-hmm. And that was, for him, I have to say that was a pretty unusual thing because he wasn't convinced about that sort of thing very often.
Right.
So I was walking in hoping that I'd have a chance to really explore things, but the way they had it set up with me, I kind of was stuck way behind the scenes and not able to really explore the St. James. So I really don't have much of an opinion about St. James myself at this point, unfortunately. I wasn't able to participate in the actual walk-around investigation, so I really can't say.
Well, if you're ever out in New Mexico again, give me a holler and we'll take you up there and have better look.
Sounds good.
I was just going to suggest that.
Okay, let's see. As far as the research going on in parapsychology right now, what do you think is like the most interesting research that's presently ongoing?
Well, I think the most interesting research actually, that's kind of hard to say. I mean, to me, a lot of the mediumship research is very, very interesting. That the Windbridge Institute is doing, and they're doing also at the University of Virginia. I'm very interested in quantum effects research that Dean Radin is doing up at the Institute of Analytic Sciences. It's kind of an intent experiment, so it's a form of psychokinesis that he's doing. And the research that he's done and that Daryl Bem has done, which has caused so much controversy about presentiment, which is that our bodies and we can kind of sense things before they happen. That's a very, very interesting piece of research. Bem's research, which has gotten an enormous amount of controversy from the scientific community and interestingly, actually brought up an enormous amount of prejudice, very clear prejudice against parapsychology because his research was so good. And people were saying, well, no matter how good it is, I can't believe it.
Right.
Which is a really interesting perspective comments coming from any scientist, for that matter.
There's a lot of bias, isn't there? Between
totally, yeah. I mean, it's really. I've actually run into some really strange circumstances with people, and I see it. People even within the sciences. You talk to people who are cross-discipline, who are like a physicist who is a quantum physicist, and there's skepticism from other physicists about quantum physics and. String theory has come under extreme fire from a number of people within physics. Mm-hmm. So even within the fields, you talk to psychologists, which is a social science, you find extraordinary bias from one school of psychological thought to another. So this is not uncommon even within fields, but parapsychology has really interesting implications in a couple of different ways that freak people out just to no end. And what they're thinking of, unfortunately, is they're thinking along the same lines as a lot of people who read the Weekly World News, that suddenly if we declare that psychic phenomena is real, that everybody can read everybody else's mind, which unless we find a pill that does that, nothing's going to change. We're still going to be as barely psychic as we are now. It just means more research can be done because there's an acknowledgement that it's worthy of study.
Okay. Well, let's talk about Atlantic University, since that's the thing I was wrong on. You can actually learn about parapsychology.
Right. Well, let's talk about this education issue because it's a real interesting and unfortunate issue in some respects. Parapsychology has only had one accredited program, full program in the United States prior to what's happening with Atlantic, and that was John F. Kennedy University's program. That's the only one that actually degrees were given in parapsychology, a fully accredited program. It's what I graduated with back in the 80s. And the sad truth about this circumstance is that there's not really a job market because there's not really any funding, and without that kind of push, it's hard to get people to put any effort into putting together a degree program. There's not been funding for universities to start the degree programs. There's not been any funding to keep them going. You can't just start up a program at a university within their budget and expect that suddenly it's going to continue or even start up. There's a lot of specific issues besides the accreditation. And typically, actually, if a major university decided to start one, they could get the program accredited within a couple of days. It wouldn't take very long, depending on how they're actually doing it. Atlantic University, which is a small, very, very small university, has offered transpersonal psychology. It is a university that was started or came out of the Edgar Cayce Foundation, which is now the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach. And they switched over to not just doing local classes, but also doing online courses for their transpersonal program a few years ago. And very recently, last year, they hired as their Director of Student Affairs Dr. Nancy Zingroni, who is a parapsychological researcher herself. She has a degree in psychology from the University of Edinburgh, which actually does have a department within, or say a subdivision within their Department of Psychology that specializes in parapsychology, and has produced the parapsychologists in the United Kingdom for the last 20-some-odd years. Their degrees in psychology, however, not in parapsychology. That's what it says, but their research and everything they did was in parapsychology. Nancy got there with her husband, Dr. Carlos Alvarado, who also graduated from Edinburgh. He's the scholar in residence. And they, last year, they were in talks and finally were able to work it all out with the university. The university wanted to start a master's program in parapsychology. So I was hired actually in November. I'm already teaching a course. They've had one parapsychology course through the university for the last few years, which is something for the transpersonal students. And I was asked to teach that, which I'm teaching this semester. I'm actually going to be teaching it again, starting the summer semester, which starts in May. And it's available right now for registration at atlanticuniv.edu. We're also about to start developing the first classes to go through the accreditation process, because the federal distance learning accreditation body needs to accredit the classes themselves, not just the program. And we expect that that'll go through. If we get them done by May, then we're hoping to have the process started, and technically we could have the program starting as early as the fall semester. The courses will certainly be offered, we're sure, but we may not be able to officially start the program until January of next year.
Okay. Well, that kind of...
People can take...
Oh, go ahead.
I was saying that people can take the one course and then continue on, certainly, with the other courses. This one course will count towards the master's as well, in fact. So one of the first courses we're developing, by the way, I'm developing the investigations class as one of the first courses to go.
Well, I was looking at one of your articles, and it was, what was it called, Wendy? I want the five biggest mistakes, or
the six mistakes that ghost hunters make, or whatever.
And there was that one you had in there about there are no experts in the paranormal. And that's
well,
not, that's
again,
not right.
I was not quoted saying that, because there are experts.
Mm-hmm.
Parapsychologists, I taught graduate courses. I don't know, and I've written books on the subject. I've done research. I hear this phrase, there are no experts, coming from people who then suddenly they're the ones who are the speakers at these conferences,
right? Which
kind of vexes me a little bit. Parapsychologists know their field. I mean, I know my field. I know my field's history. I may not be, we don't know for sure what's going on, but if you want to say that, then there are no experts in quantum physics. There are no experts in any theoretical field at all.
Right.
If you're going to start talking about there not being experts.
Yeah, and that's what I'm
however,
saying.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, that's what I was saying, is that that's not a true statement. I mean, I don't,
yeah,
and you just pretty much explained why. I mean, it's the people who are putting that out there, Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that really bothers me the most, I think, when I talk to ghost hunting groups is the lack of awareness that there is a history here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting that some of the early stuff, which is available, again, for free, is some of the most interesting stuff on ghosts that you'll ever read. Some of it's a little dry because the writing wasn't the best, but a lot of it's actually really cool, and there are some good writers in the later 1900s. And again, it's free, and there's thousands of pages of it out there.
Oh, you can go to archive.org and get a lot of that.
That's one of the best places to get it. Yeah, absolutely. Or if you have a Kindle or a Nook, a lot of those books have been converted now, and they're still free.
Yeah, definitely something to look into for sure. Educate yourself by all means.
Yeah, I got 400 of them on my Nook.
Oh wow, that's quite a collection. Then I don't have that many. Okay, so
they're all free.
Let's see
So I want to mention one other thing about the education piece here.
Okay.
There also is, there has been for the last year also a distance learning and online program accredited in the United Kingdom, which people overseas can take. Unfortunately, and I had a couple of my students who were interested in doing that. Unfortunately, there wasn't financial aid for overseas students, and they kind of wanted it was very hard for people not in the United Kingdom to kind of do this program. There are other courses. Carolyn Watt, who is at the University of Edinburgh, offers a course called An Introduction to Parapsychology. It's an online, very intensive, very research-oriented course, which does a little bit of stuff on field investigation. But I highly recommend to any ghost hunting group out there who want to know what the science is behind all this. And it's a really good course. I have been offering for the last 5 years now, maybe it's almost 6, non-academic courses, kind of very deep overviews of different areas of parapsychology for distant learners that are MP3-based and text-based, and this is through HCH Institute in Northern California, Lafayette, California. And part of my process with my students is that they not only listen to the lectures, they read the stuff, but then they talk to me on the phone. So I've actually tried to make it a little bit more personal than you actually would have with just the email or online exchange in that way. But there are other options that one has for learning about parapsychology, many of which are directed at field investigators that have just been overlooked or ignored in favor of the blind leading the blind sometimes. I see some of these Ghost Hunter 101 classes being taught by people who don't know anything.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of those.
Yeah.
What's your
somebody's
opinion?
making money, but it's not the parapsychology.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, like that International Ghost Hunter Society, was it $220? You can become a certified ghost hunter, and people buy
and I've
this.
actually seen their materials, and I got to tell you, I just was so shocked. They may have changed over the years, but I had somebody take my initial workshops a number of years ago and actually gave me their copy of that material, and I was floored at how deficient it was in an understanding of anything that had gone before.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just there's a lot of that out there too, unfortunately, but it's good. That's why I wanted to talk about this educational stuff, because there is a way you can broaden your knowledge in a more legitimate way.
The word is
legitimate. And they're just. I think that people go to the Parapsychology Foundation's website, just as a starting point, www.parapsychology.org. That will lead you to they have bibliographies you can download of recommended reading in almost every area of parapsychology, including near-death experiences, including reincarnation, including field investigation. And a lot of those books, while they may not be in print, they are accessible through used book sources, certainly interlibrary loan, and a lot of them are again free. So there are ways that people can do this very cheaply without taking a course. They can kind of do self-study. And I'm happy if people contact me to recommend resources or books and things for people to get started if they prefer not to do that.
Okay, Wendy's got a question from you from the chat room.
I've got a question for you from the chat room. It says, within the current sciences, is there a hope of proving or disproving the existence of ghosts? And if so, what one science will lead the way towards this progress?
Well, again, we're back to the question of what a ghost is, and if by everybody's definition it's a human being after their death, in other words, something of us survives the death of our body, that's the question of consciousness. And while there are folks coming from physics, it's probably going to come from quantum physics, and in conjunction with folks in parapsychology to some extent, and the small field of consciousness studies, because we're trying to all figure out what this thing called consciousness is, with a base assumption that it's more than just the brain. It's not going to come from certainly folks who are saying that everything here is just the brain, because that just kind of says that ghosts don't exist at all. But that's more than likely where it's all going to come from.
Okay.
So,
what's your opinion on EVP? Do you think it's a legitimate phenomenon, or is it something else?
I do, but as the late science fiction writer Theodore Sturgeon said, 90% of science fiction is crap, but then again, 90% of everything is crap.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's the case here. I've heard an awful lot of EVP that sounds to me like somebody just, whispering under their breath, that actually sounds more like "ugh" than anything else, or sounds like rustling of winds that sound like birds, that people are telling me sounds like, they're saying my name, they're audio ink blots in some respects. Human beings are designed to look for patterns and things. I've also heard some EVP that was captured under extremely good conditions, that are extremely controlled conditions, that was very, very, very good. There is some really exceptional research out there. There is a new book by Annabella Cordozo on electronic voice phenomena, which was published a few months ago. That's exceptionally good. Also covers other areas of instrumental transcommunication. So there's some good stuff out there. I think the American Association for Electronic Voice Phenomena have been doing some good work there. But what I'm constantly seeing are some very bizarre theories about the audio being too high pitched, or something that can be easily explained by any audio engineer as not being possible, given the tools that people are using. And most people seem to be unaware that you can disconnect the microphone from any recorder and still get EVP.
What do you think? Have you played around with the program Pratt yet? Praat?
No, I'm not familiar with that one.
What it does is it takes everything, puts it into a spectrogram, and you're looking for the phonics, the vowel sequences. We had one EVP that came through. We were doing a gig with a radio show here locally, and we couldn't figure out there was a voice. I was like, what's it saying? And everybody had their own opinion. So learning a little bit about that, I thought, well, I know a lady that works at a UNM that knows how to read spectrograms, so I'll give it to her, and she tell me what this thing is saying, And she looked at it. She said, okay, it's saying, yeah, here's the vowel sequences. I think it's based on my analysis, it's saying I'm knocking at the door. But she goes, this is kind of strange because there's things that are missing. And I said, well, what do you mean? And there are sounds that we make with our voices, like champing or plosives, things like that should be there if it was a person talking, that we're missing.
Well, let me throw something out at you here, and that is one of my buddies, Garrett Hudfeth, and along with another audio engineer, Al Rauber, both have extremely good background in audio engineering, Al especially. Taking a look at the voice analysis of some EVP versus human voices, that it was pretty easy to tell the two apart because the EVP seemed to be created in the device itself, making it an electronic voice. And this is the thing about if it was an actual sound, acoustical sound, it would actually be voice phenomena, not electronic voice phenomena.
Right.
So they were able to tell because there were those things were missing, that it was looking like it was mechanically or electronically created. And that, coupled with the idea that you can have the microphone disconnected, going back to tape recorders where even there were a couple of cases apparently of unopened cassette tapes that had pertinent EVP on them, that seemed to fit right in actually with the idea that this is all mind over matter. I mean, if there's an entity there, whether it's a living or a deceased person, the mind of someone is affecting the device to cause that voice. But unfortunately, we know from research on psychokinesis that living people can affect things, devices. And so some of what's really seems to be really good EVP may be the expectation of the operator wanting to get really good EVP affecting the device themselves. And there's an enormous amount of resistance from ghost hunters about this because they don't know the research on psychokinesis at all.
Right.
It would be the same process if an entity did it, but my gut feeling is that the reason why certain people get more EVP than others is that those folks, whether they know it or not, are kind of mediums. They're kind of, I like to call them techno-mediums. They're people who somehow bond with both the device and the entity and allow this, kind of help it along. Because there are some people that just get EVP all the time, and in the same circumstance, other people who never get it.
I've heard Barry Taft say that same thing, so...
Yeah. Okay. So we've both, Barry and I have talked about this. I've talked about this with some of the other researchers in the field, and it seems like there's an unconscious helping along from some of the operators with it. They're certainly not aware of it. It's not an intentional thing. But that does mean that we don't always know where the voice is coming from, who the voice is coming from. And you can't just say that it's a deceased person at that point.
Okay, I have another one from the chat room. It asks, do you think that ghosts will ever definitely be proven or not?
From a scientific perspective, I'd say no. Not until the other question's answered, not until the definition of consciousness and proof of consciousness is actually proven. We need that base in science to really accept it. Now, will they be proven to the satisfaction of people in the field of parapsychology? That's possible. To most of us, certainly ESP has been proven. To the mainstream scientific community, ESP has not been proven. So I think it just is dependent on that.
Okay.
I mean, I personally think it's been to me. I've had ghosts proven to me, but I can't say from a scientific perspective that we have enough evidence for that or proof for that.
Okay, I have another one. It says, what is your opinion of the use of the ghost box?
Are we talking about Frank's box?
Frank's box, spirit box, ghost box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have very mixed feelings about that until the Frank's box, the one that actually scans radio frequency. I have more of a problem with that because I know people who have actually used transmitters and actually screwed with those things a little bit. So in other words, you can have somebody can fool them. They're not well shielded, controlled, or otherwise useful that way. And to my knowledge, they have not been tested for randomness. Are they truly randomly scanning? That's a big question when there's no entity around. That's really important to know. Same thing goes with the ovulists or the digital dowsers. You need to know what they're actually doing to be random, so that when an entity or someone comes along and makes them non-random, that it makes more sense to understand what the process is. So someone has to kind of offer those boxes up to folks who know how to test for randomnicity and who also can make sure that they're shielded against outside influence, such as radio frequencies or radio transmissions.
So basically controls. It needs more controls, so to speak.
They need absolutely more controls. And, it wouldn't take much. That's the thing, is that there are people in my field who have been dealing with random event generators, random number generators for decades. It wouldn't take a whole lot.
Well, let's go into your books now. Because what's your latest one that you got coming out?
The new one, which is coming out April 1st, is called The Ghost Detective's Guide to Haunted San Francisco. And it is it's co-authored, actually, with a psychic I've worked with for years, Annette Morton, who is a really great lady. And she and I decided that in talking to the publisher that we were working with, we're going to take a different tact on looking at haunted places. They wanted kind of haunted guides, but you look at. I just actually saw a new National Directory guide, which clearly shows the guy only went on the internet and did some research on the internet. Certainly didn't go to the places. So we're trying to do a situation where these are places we've been to, or gone to specifically for the book writing. B, we have researched them or gone through them from the perspective of a parapsychologist, that's me, and a psychic, that's Annette, and we kind of give you an idea of what it's like to be with us. So we actually have transcripts of conversations she and I have in the process, and conversations, rather one-sided, of course, that she might have with an entity in the location, with a ghost at those locations. So there's part ghost story, part investigation from a scientific perspective, part psychic investigation, and we're focused only on 7 locations in San Francisco, and we're going to try to take each book and make them fairly focused so that we can really tell a good story and give an in-depth peek at what's going on with these places.
I know Wendy's favorite, because she was talking about it when she came in, was the one you did about chocolate.
Yes.
Well, I've got a book coming out one of these days when I finish it about chocolate, but I will say that what the deal is that I'm making chocolate now. That product is actually out. You can go to my website, www.hauntedbychocolate.com, and the first products I have up there are my dark chocolate and milk chocolate ghost drops.
Okay, that's what she was talking about. Okay, so the book isn't out yet, but you're working on it. Okay.
But I'm all into chocolate.
I've come up with, I think, it's some really superior chocolate, some really good gourmet chocolate, and I've got some flavors that I'll be loading up real soon. And although it's a little goofy, I have also going to be putting up, sometime in the next couple weeks, a fortune-telling chocolate format. So, in other words, I've got this system where they're kind of like rune stones. They're symbols that I've designed with a friend of mine, and you can kind of do fortune telling or tell your own fortunes with your own chocolates. Of course, you have to eat the chocolate. That's part of the process.
Oh,
for
well,
that.
that's
it's
the
called
best part.
The Cocoa Oracle.
We'll have to get that and try it. That's available now?
Yeah. It will be available. I actually have some made already. I just haven't put them up on the website. I'm still taking some pictures and trying to get all that together.
Let me know. Let me know when you get that ready. We'll try it out on the show. That sounds like fun.
Sure. Yeah, it's a fun thing, and again, you have to eat the chocolate.
Yeah, of course. That's
Yes,
all. That's all
please.
part of it.
Please.
Anything else that you got going on that you think you want to let the audience know about? I think
Well, I think there'll be a lot more things coming out real soon. I am going to be speaking at the Battleship North Carolina, the USS North Carolina, on March 26th, which is in Wilmington, North Carolina. And you can go to Facebook and just pop that in and pop in Battleship North Carolina, and you should get right to that. It's an easy way to find out about that event. I'll be speaking at the Rhine Research Center the night before, on the 25th, in Durham, North Carolina. And that is, I'll be talking about psychics and charlatans, so I'll be doing a little bit of psychic entertainment as well. So I'm talking a little bit about the fraud and the reality, how to tell the difference between the two. And I have some other events that are kind of in the offing. There'll be we're in the planning stages for a fairly big paranormal festival in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, in mid-July. And that'll be I think that'll be up and running very soon, in fact. And we're trying to get some folks. Barry Taft, myself, Andrew Nichols, and a number of other folks will be appearing at that festival. And we're trying to kind of make it a kind of a combination fun event. We're also going to try and bring some magicians and maybe even have a paranormal cake decorating contest.
Okay.
To make it more fun, kind of well-rounded to a lot of folks. And it looks like the state of West Virginia and the county are going to support it. So.
Well, that's cool. Oh, definitely. Well, cool. Well, I think we're about ready to go to a break. But anyway, thanks a lot for taking your time to come in and talk to everybody. We're going to have you on again because I still got a lot of questions. But,
sure, that's fine.
And definitely keep me advised about that. Oh man, where did I need
Cocoa Oracle?
That one, and then the association that you're working on with Barry Taft and
I will.
So we can put that out.
We'll keep everybody advised about that. We're going to try to get that up and running. It's just a matter of just getting people in place around the country. We're trying to get folks like a delegate person for each of the 50 states to help us put it together. So we're almost there. At this point.
Well, cool, excellent. Well, thanks a lot, and I guess we'll be going into a music break here in the studio. So you guys stand by. We got the horror hour coming up next, of course.